I'm Joe Heath.
I'm Toni Heath.
And this is Burn Notice Noticed, a podcast about Burn Noticed, which is a podcast about Burn Notice. It's not that difficult.
Please keep up.
Today we're going to be talking about the second/third episode of Burn Notice.
What's the second episode proper? I would not count the intro as an episode.
I mean, I would, but I'm weird like that.
When they don't. Like, if you look at their numbering, this is episode 2.
So it's like a web exclusive, the first one?
Yeah.
Okay, it's like a web series bonus episode, and these are the official episodes.
It is an intro, which is not an official episode.
It's a prologue.
Yes.
Okay, so this is the official second episode.
The official second episode.
Which is about the second episode of Burn Notice, which is entitled Identity.
Correct.
Honestly, I think that's a relevant title because we're going to be discussing the identity of the podcast. You know what I mean?
No.
I'm just bullshitting and pulling stuff
That's
out of my
what
ass.
we're going to be doing. Bullshitting and pulling stuff out of our ass. The podcast.
We're pulling the podcast out of our ass?
Okay, so at the end of the last episode of Burn Notice Noticed, I talked about tightening up the format of the show a little bit. And so what I have printed out on this paper in front of me and you are what I have listed as the 6 segments of the show.
6. Okay.
We start with 1, which is the part of the show we're in now.
Okay.
Which I have called Opening Goofs. This is one of them.
This is the goof.
This is the goof.
This is the goof troop.
Then there will be segment 2, where I recap what I think the plot is of the episode of Burn Notice that Bri and Chris watched.
Right.
And you rank both how good I paid attention and how good Bri and Chris were at giving me information. Then we talk about our top podcast moments. After that, we will answer any questions that Bri and Chris asked in the podcast. Then we will discuss the Bri-Chris dynamic, and then we will rate the episode. How do you feel about that?
Sounds good to me.
All right. That being said, would you like to hear my recap of what I think happened in episode 2, Identity of Burn Notice?
Yes, let's do it.
All right. So 1, Michael finds out that his mom's house is being bugged, and it's part of the bug is in an empty house next to his mom's house. He goes to that empty house, but everything's been destroyed. He tries to get info from his mom, but his mom won't give him any until he runs some spy errands first. The spy errand being that, like, her neighbor, this little old lady, got her identity stolen, and she wants her son to do some spy shit to help her.
So far, so good.
Right? I feel very informed. He's going to do some spy shit.
Yes, that's the premise of the show.
He's gonna do some spy shit. Here's where I get sketchy, and it's not from Bri and Chris, it's from the show, whereas he's doing a lot of spy shit to help this woman supposedly get her, like, money back, right? And I do want to talk about, like, they say that they roughed her up, like the little old lady, and that's not how I typically imagine, like, people getting their identity stolen. Like, it's not a violent crime. It's a sneaky crime. If it's violent, then, like, you know who did it. You're like, well, that's the guy who stole my identity, and I canceled all my credit cards, and I fixed everything before they could do anything. That's why you have to be like, sneaky and quick about it. So, like, it's not a con if you just beat someone up.
To be fair, again, I saw the episode and I don't remember, and I just listened to the podcast and I don't remember. From what I gathered, maybe they roughed her up when things went bad. Like, they were, like, conning her, like, in person.
I'm saying these do not sound like great con man.
Oh, no, they're not.
But when he's, like, trying to con them back, the way that Bri and Chris describe it, they're, like, Fee blows up their car. It sounds like that was maybe on accident. He just shows up and he's like, hi, I'm a crime guy. Can I do crime with you? And they're like, yes. It takes, like, most of the episode before he's like, he has a plan, and, like, that is after things go wrong. And so I'm not sure what the original plan was. And, like, they start by, like, doing a bunch of spy shit, like, setting up the car, like, the car bomb that wasn't supposed to be a bomb or whatever. But, like, they're doing a lot of work is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. I feel like they're overdoing it. Like, they're putting a lot of effort into this in weird places. And it's not until, like, the end that they're like, oh, this went really wrong, but because it went so wrong, this guy now thinks that he's going to die, and we've convinced him to wire money to this hitman, and that's how we get the money back. And now that we got the money back, and this little old lady is happy, his mom can actually be helpful and be like, hey, these FBI people came in and said, if I ever saw you to call this number, here's this number. And that's my understanding of the plot of the episode Identity of Burn Notice.
That's pretty solid.
Yeah.
I will say, and they do mention this in Burn Noticed, their plot was to get him, like, nervous about his partners. and then it went too fast. That's what happens.
But, like, to get him nervous about his partners and then do what?
Sow distrust with his partners and then get just him and then, like, get money.
But how does sowing distrust get the money? That's the part of the plan that I don't understand.
He's wanting this guy to invest in him, which is just give him the money.
Gotcha.
For his plan. He doesn't trust him, so he's going to make him distrust his partner so that he trusts him to give him the money. It's very complicated.
It's very complicated, and there's a part of me that's like, if you know some dope-ass spy shit, just hack into his computer and steal his identity. Like, just fish his bank password and be done with it.
So yeah, I think you did a decent recap, and I think they did a good recap. I think they did a better recap than they did in the first episode. I feel like it was less just a list and there was more like discussion or jokes, which livens up a plot recap.
All right. Do you have any top podcast moments?
Okay, I know you said you don't really want to discuss Burn Notice, the show, very much.
No, we should only talk about it in that second segment, and that second segment is over.
Well, this is actually, I mean, I feel like it's like criticism that they didn't mention this because it bugged the hell out of me watching the episode, which is that there's a scene where they're eating dinner. He's like, I'll clean up, and like takes the plate away from Michael while he's still eating off of it. And he's like, and then like his mom's like, Michael. And then he lets her take the plate. He was still eating. Let him finish eating. There was a whole lot of food on his plate. Sorry. I just wanted to mention that because it was bugging me. As for this, I really, really liked the bit about where they're talking about the scene where the guy that he's trying to con is like testing him about the wine, the prison wine. And like just that whole segment was really funny to me. Paco is straight edge.
I like the bit about the testicle tea kettle. Just one forgetting to say the words testicle tea kettle, which is great. But also, I'm going to need to look that up later. I want to see what that's about.
What? I don't remember that. I must have been like stoned out for a second when they said testicle tea kettle.
I don't know if they say testicle tea kettle. There is a teapot that the mom has that's very fancy, but it's flesh colored.
Oh, don't remember that.
That super happens in the podcast you just listened to. Not even 20 minutes ago. We listened to it, and then we had lunch, and then with the rest of our lunch break, we're doing this.
We have no lives.
There's a part where they talk about Michael Weston and whether or not he likes people, and that like he doesn't have any sort of consistent internal metric for how to react to people. They were talking about that as like, that's not great writing. But I actually find it, very relatable. Because I also don't have a consistent internal mechanism for responding to people.
But that's bad for a spy.
It's definitely bad for a spy, for sure. Yeah. I'm just saying, I heard that and I was like, no, that makes sense. He's right about this.
Yeah, but like, you think like, if he's working with a client, he'd be able to lie about, instead of being like, you know what I mean? Like,
yeah.
Since he's a spy. I get that criticism.
I'm just saying I understand that, like, as a person. But, like, sometimes you're like, no,
Are you a spy, though?
I have empathy, and I want to help your situation. And sometimes you're like, I don't know, dude, your shit's fucked.
Yeah, but you can fake having empathy if you're a spy.
Here's the thing. I can't.
If you're a spy, you should be able to.
All right, that's fair. I'm not saying it was, like, an unfair criticism. I'm just saying, when they said that, I was like, no, that's just who I am as a person.
Okay, so they also mentioned a bit where Bruce Campbell, or Sam and Fee used the aliases Cagney and Lacey, which you were like, wait, I only know that from...
I only know one Cagney and Lacey, and it's Terry's twins on Brooklyn Nine-Nine.
You had no idea that it was an 80s cop show.
No, they're...
How have you not heard of Cagney and Lacey?
I don't know. It's an 80s TV show.
A very famous 80s TV show.
I wasn't alive.
But, like, you've heard of other shows that you've never seen.
No.
From the 80s. You've heard of, like, Cheers. You've heard of, like...
What is a Cheers?
NYPD Blue, or... You've seen an episode of Cheers.
Yeah, we've watched Cheers together.
You've heard of these shows. How have you not heard of Cagney and Lacey?
I've never heard of Cagney and Lacey because it was made in the 80s and I was born in 89. And I don't spend all my time talking to old people about old TV shows like you do.
You mean Doctor Who?
Okay. Well, I do apparently spend a significant chunk of my time talking to people about classic Doctor Who. But that's mostly your fault, so...
Yeah, that's fair. But yes, I do want to say Cagney and Lacey was
God,
a show.
It's a show. Okay.
Yeah, but the woman who played Cagney plays Michael Weston's mother.
Can I say, just from like listening to the podcast, the mental image I have of Burn Notice's mom, which I also now have that impulse. Thanks, Chris. In the podcast, Chris says that he just wants to call Michael Burn Notice.
Yeah, that's pretty funny.
My mental image of her is the mom from The Room.
I mean,
just because she seems to have the same... Oh shit, I am dead on.
Yeah.
Hell yeah. Just because she seems to have the same... Like, I imagine all of her lines are delivered the exact same way of like, anyway, I got the results back and I definitely have cancer. Like, I feel like all of her lines are like, yeah, well, you know, these men wanted to kill you and I invited them in for tea. Like... I just imagine that the delivery is all exactly the same.
A little bit like that, but more gravelly. She has a bit more of a gravelly voice, slightly.
Right. She just smokes more.
Yeah. But yeah, she played Cagney in Cagney and Lacey, and Lacey was played by Tyne Daly.
All right.
So, and Tyne Daly was in Spider-Man Homecoming as the head of damage control, which I was very excited to see in Spider-Man. That's unrelated. She's also a really, really adorable lesbian in A Bread Factory. So, watch that movie.
I have the opposite of a favorite moment.
An opposite? Okay.
Yeah, which is that Bri mentioned that there's going to be gratuitous shots of feet, and that it'll come up later in the podcast. I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to talk about feet.
I mean, there's gratuitous shots of everything.
That's fine.
In Burn Notice.
I'd rather take a gratuitous shot of a butt than a gratuitous shot of a foot. I don't know why.
You don't like feet?
It's not that I don't like feet. It's like I like talking about people's weird fetishes. I don't like being made aware of them, weird. And I don't...
Translate that look to an audio form.
Oh, no.
Anyway, continue. What was the rest of your thought?
I have no idea anymore. The rest of my thought was, yuck, bad.
I mean, out of all of the fetishes... weird fetishes you could have, feet is like, it's not even that gross.
The other moment that I had that I wanted to talk about was the moment where Bri convinces Chris that the underwritten character fee, that the reason why she makes the decisions that she does, which is to just tag along on this case that she has no reason to, is because she's new in town and networking. Because, the logic behind that is amazing. Just no, hear me out. Here's why it works. Which is one of my favorite games when it comes to writing, is just, fixing broken things. Where you're like, yeah, I know, it's... Especially in, Doctor Who, there's no canon, and to stress out about canon is, a bad thing. Don't stress out about it. It's fine. Everything contradicts itself. It's fine. But it is always fun to sit down and be like, but how would I make it work, though?
And yeah, they also talk a bit about when, Fee basically made a car bomb that exploded an entire car when it was supposed to just disable the car. She's justifying that very hardcore, too. And, Chris is like, but that's from stuff later. There's none of that in this episode. They're just like, oh, that was bad. Anyway, moving on.
I like the phrase crime gun when they're discussing things and they say, what's the scene? You don't know? Did you listen to the podcast?
I did listen. You just said crime gun. I don't remember.
Yeah, when he's first trying to convince the con man that he is also a crime guy. And he's like, I know you're a crime guy because you have a crime gun. It's a specific type of gun that is only used to do crimes. Because
they're crime dudes.
Because they're crime dudes.
It's like space gun or space thing or moon thing. But when you're not in genre fiction, when you're just in a procedural or cop drama or something, it's crime. It's crime. Yeah, crime is the prefix.
Did you notice Bri and Chris answer any question or pose any questions in the podcast that they did not know the answers to?
They could not remember the alias that Michael Weston was doing, and it was Pete. It was Peter Jordan.
Peter Jordan.
Which, to be fair, it was a real person that he was assuming the identity of, because he had been in prison with Paco.
I have written down that Bad Boys 2 is, in fact, a Michael Bay movie.
Those are your questions answered. I hope you feel informed.
All right, so the next thing I have is discuss the Bri-Chris dynamic. Did it evolve? Did it change? Did anything stand out to you?
I think it got more heated at the beginning of the podcast.
Yeah, I have written down that they almost had a fight before they even talk about the title card.
The title card?
Yeah, they're talking about the cold open. And then they're like, and then finally we get the title card. And I was like, we got pretty heated before we ever even got to
talking about the pacing?
Yeah.
Yeah. And she's like, no, it's fine. And he's like, it's not.
I will say about the pacing and them talking about this cold open has been the closest I've ever been to kind of wanting to watch some of Burn Notice. Not an episode. I didn't listen to this episode and go, I want to watch that episode. I did think, I might YouTube this specific scene because I want to see how bonkers the editing is.
And also just to see how is the pacing?
Yeah, I want to know which one's right.
You want to know if Chris or Bri is correct.
And then later I'll tweet about it and start a fight.
I mean, you could just watch the beginning of the episode on Hulu. It's there. You just watch till the cold open and then bail.
I might do that. The thing is, I won't ever watch an episode before we record a podcast on it because that'll ruin everything.
It'll ruin the whole integrity of this podcast.
Of the show.
Which is very integrous.
Yes.
Is that a word?
No.
Integrous? It's full of integrity. It's integritable.
Integritable. That's the one. That's the correct version of that word.
I mean, they seemed to chill out a little bit more as it went on. There was a couple of more flare-ups of but no, it's fine. From Bri. I knew this was going to be the dynamic, is that Bri would be defending it more than Chris, because Bri's actually a fan, and Chris doesn't care.
Do you think that's good for a good dynamic for a show about a show? That you have, one person who loves it and one person who doesn't care? I
mean, I think that's an interesting dynamic. I don't know if it's, the best dynamic or the only dynamic that you could have for a show. Because, we both enjoy Doctor Who. But, yeah, I think it's an interesting dynamic.
Maybe our show would be better if we argued more.
No, it wouldn't. Though, it would be interesting to see them both do a show that neither one of them knew anything about. So, Bri and Chris, you should do Cagney and Lacey, Noticed.
Noticed.
So do we need to move on to the final segment?
The sixth and final segment, we rate the episode.
Which you have a subcategory for here. Describe our rating system.
Actually, this is kind of something I wanted to talk about, is that at the beginning of the podcast, at the beginning of the episode, they recap their rating system, and I kind of wonder if they're going to do that every time. And actually what I have written down as my notes is them, I have the words recap meta ? Which in my shorthand means that they give a recap of their rating system and what the podcast is about. And then they start talking about how they get recaps. Every episode of Burn Notice starts with a recap because it's the first time we're really doing serialized television. And at that time, nobody was binge watching. So you'd catch a random episode and be like, what is happening? And they kind of talked about whether that was necessary and stuff like that. And I'm like, that's interesting because it seems like they're going to kind of do a recap of what the podcast is about at the beginning of every episode. So I had very similar thoughts about the podcast, about what they were saying about Burn Notice.
And it's too late for us to do it. We've already screwed the pooch on this one. We didn't do a recap at the beginning of this episode.
That is the weird thing about listening to this podcast and listening to it with the mindset of I'm going to critique this. Besides it just being an insane premise, it's also there's a part of me that's oh, actually they're doing it this way. Should I be doing it that way? It becomes
almost self-reflective.
Yeah, totally it does.
Which makes sense for a podcast about a podcast.
The whole thing's very inherently meta and confusing.
It eats its own tail.
But anyway, in the recap, they give their rating system, which is what we're going to do here at the end.
Mix it up.
Yeah. It is either 1, a great episode of a podcast, 2, a great episode of Burn Noticed, and I really think we need to be making more of an effort to pronounce it Burn, Noticed.
Okay.
Because that is the title. The title is not Burn Noticed, it's Burn, Noticed.
Okay.
A great episode of Burn Noticed or an episode of a podcast. And our criteria for if it's a great episode of a podcast is it changes how I think about something.
Did it?
No, not really. It makes me cry.
Did it make you cry?
No. It makes me laugh, and we have a qualification on this, which is not a chuckle, not I did kind of that a couple of times.
Uh-huh.
It's a big laugh that catches you by surprise kind of laugh.
I definitely had one of those moments, but...
You did?
Yeah, it was the whole... Paco was straight edge.
You laughed.
I'm laughing now.
Uproariously.
Well, I mean, I'm not gonna do that here because I'm at work, but...
But that's what I'm saying, you will if it's really funny.
No, I won't because I'm at work and I'm self-conscious.
You
but
won't
I
at
know
all.
that I would have laughed if I was not in a public environment.
I don't feel like that counts, to be honest.
I think it does. I had to stifle my laughter.
But
still, that's 1 out of 3.
I'm just saying, we put a very specific qualification on it, and now you're telling me that this specific qualification just never occurs?
It mentally occurs. Maybe not
you
physically.
can't. This is specifically, it can't be the equivalent of you being like, LOL, while you're not changing like your face at all.
No,
Can't be like, I laughed real hard in my head. And that's why I think this is a great episode of a podcast, because it made me consider laughing out loud.
No, I had to restrain from laughing out loud because I'm in public. Well, not public. I'm at work. But
You say that and like we're recording a whole ass podcast right now.
But my door's shut. My door's not usually shut.
Okay. I'm just gonna move on because I could spend the rest of our time talking about this.
Oh, just know that I'm right. Continue. We have 1 out of 3, so it's not a great podcast. A great episode of a podcast.
Is it a great episode of Burn, Noticed? Chris and Bri experience a dynamic shift. I would not say that's happened. I'd say it's pretty much the same, right?
Yeah.
I think that's a weird qualification we put on it, but...
Yeah. I don't know if it's necessarily a dynamic shift, but is there, like, a strong example of their dynamic?
Oh, okay. This is printed out. I'm gonna have to reprint it.
Just do some whiteout. I'd say, like, there is definitely some heavy instances of their dynamic.
Yeah.
So, specifically in talking about the pace at the beginning.
I feel like I know what happened in the episode of Burn Notice. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I think, and you confirmed that, right? Like,
yes.
I gave a pretty clear, concise recount of... If I had just told you what happened without you knowing that I heard it from a podcast, you'd been like, yeah, she's seen that episode.
You know what you didn't mention in your recap?
What's that?
That Sam and Fee pretend to bone.
I mean, it wasn't super relevant to the plot.
But it's the best part of the episode. Were you aware of it?
Yes, I was aware of it because I
Okay.
talked about it in the podcast. I didn't write it down because I only wrote down, like, the bones.
Except for the boning.
Except for the boning. The boning was not important to the bones of the plot of the episode.
But it was the highlight of the episode, was the bone.
I don't know. I didn't watch the episode. I listened to the episode of Burn, Noticed.
In which they said the highlight of the episode was the boning. Anyway, continue.
I feel like you want me to have a specific opinion about the episode of Burn Notice, and I had been very clear about the fact that I will not do that because that is not what this podcast is about. Do not ask me any more opinions about the TV show Burn Notice. That is not what I'm here to talk about.
All right.
Okay.
You're wrong. Continue.
I'm not wrong. I can't be wrong.
I mean, we were specifically talking about your recap of the episode, and there was a piece that I considered a vital piece of the episode that you missed, that they didn't miss, that you didn't bring up, that I thought you might bring up, but you didn't.
I didn't because it didn't seem very important.
They pretend to bone.
The next thing is, I am entertained for the duration of the podcast.
Yeah.
No offense.
I was more entertained in this one than I was in the last one, I think. I felt like there was more bits.
Do you want to go ahead and call this a great... I feel like we need to workshop these criteria a little bit. Because I feel like we met some of those. I also don't feel like this is a great episode of this podcast. It's pretty good.
I'd say it's better than the first one.
Yeah. Great is such a strong word to me.
I would recommend this one because it's good. Whereas I might say skip the first. No, I wouldn't say skip the first one. You know me. But here's another problem: is that Bri and Chris are our friends, and it's gonna feel weird to be like, no, this isn't a good one. Don't listen to our friends' podcast.
Here's the thing: like we've
fucked up from the beginning.
Yeah, no.
With the idea of this podcast.
Listen, we've got to work on this. This is a problem with us. And we have to be honest and impartial.
There's no way to be impartial.
You're gonna have to work on it, okay?
Like, literally, there's no way to be impartial.
You can. You just gotta be better at it.
Anyway, this is a great episode of Burn, Noticed.
It's an okay episode of Burn, Noticed. It's a good episode, is what I will say.
Okay.
I feel like, yeah, it's a good episode. It met a lot of the criteria that I set, and now I don't want to call it a great episode.
I would say, like, there was very little negatives. I don't even know if there was a negative, except for the fact that they didn't mention the scene where Fee steals Michael's food.
I don't know if that is a negative. And it's definitely an episode of a podcast, because the only criterion for that one is that it just needs to exist, right?
Yeah, and it's understandable, and it's not just, like, nonsense.
It's coherent.
It's coherent, yeah.
See, yeah, I have a hard time calling it, with what we've said, I'm still like, it's not great, it was good. Maybe it needs to meet all three for it to be great, and if it meets one or two of the three, then it's good.
Well, the thing is, I think if it meets all of them, it's a great episode. But also, I mean, like, if you go past that, if you want it more, like, that just makes it a great episode of a podcast.
Here's kind of the problem with it, is, like, what they have set for their criteria of if it's a great episode of Burn Notice. It's so hard when I start saying the word burn notice. I have to think really hard about how I'm about to end that phrase. Like, the criteria they set is like from the knowledge of what the show is, right? Whereas we don't necessarily know what this show is because it's just started.
Yeah. They thought a lot more about it than we did. We did it as a just spur of the moment thing.
Right. I mean, I like what we have. I feel like I want to change, like, a great episode of Burn Notice to a good episode of Burn Noticed.
All right. Well, you maybe should have thought about this before printing it up.
You guys, it's not just printed up, it's cut down. It's a piece of paper that's cut down to the exact size of my planner so that it can fit inside of my planner. It's very official. And at the top, it says, Burn, noticed, notes.
I am proud of you.
Did we reach an official consensus?
I'd say it's a great episode of Burn Notice.
Burn, notice. Yeah. I'd say it's good. I think it would have to meet all three criteria in order for me to say that it's great.
I would say it's the best episode so far.
That's definitely fair. Sure.
Out of 2.5.
How would you rate this episode of Burn Notice Noticed?
Oh, a solid F.
Yeah. I think we definitely made like a tighter structure, but I also feel like there were less jokes.
I don't know. I made up some words. I've already forgotten what it was.
What are you talking about?
Integraful.
Oh, yeah. That was an okay joke.
No, yeah, I'm pretty funny. I would like to say if you liked this, you can check out more of us at the Watch-A-Thon of Rassilon, which is our Doctor Who podcast, which you can go to watchrassilon.com to check that out. And also be sure to check out Burn, Noticed, which you can go to burnnoticepodcast.rocks.
Could you imagine if somebody was listening to this but had no idea what Burn, Noticed was? They're just listening to this podcast like, I don't know what these guys are talking about, but I like them. Oh, that's just like hearing them chit-chat.
I assume that's 50% of our audience.
I assume 50% of our audience is Bri and Chris.
They're each 50%.
Yes.
But yeah, I think that's all I got. You got anything else?
No.
All right, so Burn Noticed. You've been noticed. Burn.
Oof. All right, goodbye, and I love you in a platonic parasocial way.
This has been Burn Noticed, a podcast about Burn Noticed, which is about the show Burn Notice. It's not that difficult.
Please keep up.